think everyone who's here was in our last meeting, but nevertheless, welcome to our third and final day of our symposium, ROLLBACK 2021, Digital Futures Among an Earthly Land. And we are so delighted to be joined for our final portfolio presentations as well by Alastair and Shona, who will be presenting their most current works, and I think elements of their past works as well. And I'm just going to try and sort of introduce you in a sort of roundabout way on what you're going to be discussing. But for both of them, they're sort of exploring sort of VR, digital worlds, sort of reimagined realities within that, and AI. So this should be very exciting. I'm excited. And without further ado, Alastair, please take the floor.
Sure. Give me a minute just to try and share this, and I'll just start this up. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to show a slide previously just to give a bit of context for the current work that I'm doing and how it aligns with the one that I'm doing now, Elapsed Existence. This one is Synthetic Gaze, did later on in 2020. And the work started from an interest in alternating light, looking at the difference between the natural and the artificial. And one thing that I noticed from it was that because of this isolation that we've been going through, I was put into a position where I had to focus on a variety of mediums. So I was using light projection, animation, and even painting. And when merging all of these together, I was then able to create the visuals that you see before you. And this led to considering how machines perceive the natural world around us. And whilst the work kind of demonstrates that interaction of the two merging, I felt as though the work didn't question what implications this could have had on our relation to the natural world around us. And this brought me on to what we're doing now. What I'm doing now is Elapsed Existence. Although the project is still in development, the concept focuses towards our connection to the natural environment and how it is diminished from being submerged into digital connections such as social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. And how these platforms are making us disassociated with the world we're surrounded in, losing sight of our natural environment. And, you know, this implicates a perceived loss of time, materiality, and intimacy with one another. And I think that's something that was fairly important when making this project, and I wanted to consider that heavily. Because I think personally, at least for me as well, I've been through the majority of the things, as we all have, and that loss of connection with people is something that's very prevalent in this time. This quote by Trevor Paglin was done at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and what stands out for me within this was a passage. Pardon me, a passage where he says, images in the world are made by machines for other machines, and machines themselves are doing most of the looking at the images in the world. This heavily relates towards the time that we're in now, especially with this online presence that we have. And within a world with artificial intelligence, as spoken before, we have allowed these machines to become hidden within society, and they now observe and censor and monitor everyday things that we do within social media and within everyday life, even going to getting groceries. But as machines' process of seeing changes, I feel as though our own process of seeing has changed also. You know, our attention to detail and our attention when looking at images and perceiving images. This constant stream has reflected upon this, and looking back, at original inspiration for the work. I looked a lot at deep fakes, and for whoever of you that don't know about deep fakes, essentially it's kind of like a digital impersonation of someone. So if you were to take, there was an instance with Barack Obama where I think his name is Jordan Peele. You're going to have to forgive me if that's incorrect, but he did a deep fake of Obama and voiced his actions and recorded himself talking over, and millions and millions of people almost believe this. And you know, if we have that kind of technology there, it almost provides a sense of kind of uncanny and unknowing. And for the start of the project, I thought it was relevant and necessary to kind of promote a subject for this, and a face, a familiar face. I feel as though with the human figure and, you know, our facial expressions, it's something that we recognize from a very young age. It is something that is built into us. We understand when people walk across the street, if they're happy and they're sad, we can understand this through their expressions. And, you know, that led me to experimenting with such things. And on the right, you can see a couple of images of original things that I was looking into. And this started creating resemblance and familiarity with the image, however, still maintaining and acknowledging that this is an artificial component. It's not real, it's not material. So when researching further about artificial surroundings, the first thing that came up for me was virtual reality. It's something that's fairly new within this day and age, and it's something that's going to be built further upon. But for you guys that don't know, essentially, it's a digital mirage, an illusion. It's putting yourself in a completely different perception, and it speaks for that conceptual premise of being disassociated with your surroundings. And this is something that I wanted to really project within my work. And within that, you know, the disconnecting yourself, the user is disconnected from that material world. And VR has almost become a medium within itself. You know, if I was to explain to you things that you can do within virtual reality, if you can imagine a painter and them having a 2D canvas in front of them and a blank canvas, for virtual reality, that canvas is a room. It's anywhere, it's anything, and you can create whatever you want within that area, within that space. And someone who has inspired me to pursue virtual reality artworks is Bjork. She did Biophilia, if anyone's aware of it, a work with David Attenborough. And she's a musician that utilizes VR to immerse her audience and engage her audience into the world that she envisions her music would be in, her prevalent in. And, you know, as my series has developed, as you will be seeing now, is that these are the works that have been created from virtual reality, that have been manipulated, distorted, and having ideas along this disconnection. And in using virtual reality, I was able to create these artificial environments to then be present in that space and to photograph and capture, as said before. All of this develops alongside the premise of both becoming and integrated within our own creations, displaced from reality. This work reflects, and in making such work, I aim to provide awareness for people within their own bubbles, within their own perceptions of their surroundings, and kind of start a dialogue with our relationship with the natural world now than it was before. These textures and colors were something that was also quite important within my work. I feel as though I needed to grasp the viewer. Nowadays, people are so attentive within their own devices, so focused on what they're on, and needing and demanding the next thing, that I believe the images have to be upping their attractive and alluring state. So I picked colours and textures that kind of gripped and allured you into the image. I think one of the other things I wanted to say was that by grasping this audience and maintaining a familiarity within it, you know, you can resemble and perceive that this is a face within it, but barely. It's just there. It's just on the surface. And I think it all ties around with that idea of unknowing. With these images, these were along the same size as the series that I've just been showing you, but these were more to do with paintings that I'd created and then manipulated within Photoshop. And I wanted to maintain a sense of natural elements within the work to allow people to understand a bit more about it, not just being about the digital. And lastly, with one of these images, is that this is trying to perceive that visualize the concept that I'm trying to grasp, is that we are unaware of that outside, that material space that we all know, until we're submerged and engulfed by technology. And, you know, and especially after developing these kind of things, textures was something that was kind of popping out to me and found attractive. You know, distortion and pixels was something that I never used to find interesting, but now I've been so acutely interested into my phone. Something pops out, something textured, something palpable. And I feel like together with this series of images, it speaks of this. And finally, this is where I'm hoping to lead the final work. Again, it's still in development, but I'm hoping to create a virtual interactive exhibition that places all of these works together and places the user within an empty space, a studio room like on the right here. And that recording will of said user interacting with the exhibition will provide a visual understanding and development of how the work and the concept goes together. And yeah, I flashed through that pretty quickly, so apologies for that, but I'm happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, that's fine. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Alastair. Yeah, so I think we'll move on to questions. Please feel free to either come online or, you know, put a message in either of the chats on Instagram or on Teams chat, and we'll relay that all. But I think a nice place to start would really just be to like dig into that process of making as well, and just like what I can't even imagine what that process would be like. So I just kind of want to know, like, how are you making those works, and what is that experience, and what does it feel like in a way?
So it's a good question. I mean, only recently, I think it was halfway through the project, I decided to purchase a virtual reality headset, and I was always worried about what that would entail and how real it would actually be. I feel like a lot of us haven't really experienced anything like this because it's such a new technology. But you know, when being placed in that situation, the work started to just come naturally almost. It was very. I started making sculptures. That was the original start. I made sculptures that had figures within it, and that had different textures and qualities to them. And then after creating these sculptures and environments, I would then, as I said before, start photographing them and kind of shooting within my own world that I'd created. And I think that's something that has so much potential for the future of photography. You know, instead of having to be outside, we can create our own worlds now and shoot within them, so we can create our own topics within these worlds. But the process itself, once I'd taken these screen grabs or photos, I would then manipulate them into Photoshop. I could distort them, project them, and take further photos. It's just like heavily embedding more digital and digital effects and size to see what can I really bring out of kind of this coding, this coming from nothing really.
Yeah. Sort of like layers upon layers of like digital and imagery and color and so on. Things becoming more and more kind of tangible in a way because there's so much of it, and yet it's just like almost seeing like within your mind like what happens when you like close your eyes and suddenly we're sort of let into this beautiful fantastical world, which feels so kind of, I mean, obviously like kind of frightening because it's so different, but there's that sense of something uncanny as you were sort of talking about where, you know, we can see human figures and we can see things that do feel like they belong in the natural world, I guess. Yeah, what was the sort of aim between like some of the sculptures that you were making? What did you want to show and create really?
Yeah, so I think something that you mentioned just then was kind of the blurring or mixing of realities. I feel like that was something that was fairly important within the work. I wanted to make the work tangible whilst still saying about how translucent it can be. And I think within the context of developing that work and creating these sculptures, I did have an idea of just portraying something that we kind of almost like a reflection of when we're engaging with these screens. I feel like we are so unaware of our environment. Even the other day, and I had a walk this morning, and you know, I went past so many people just on their phones, unaware of what's around them, and I almost represent what the inner workings of themselves are, what's going on with them, whilst being out and unaware of what's going on. So I think, you know, portraying human figures and human faces was important to then have wires and connected lines and diagrams coming in, interweaving throughout the kind of figure to kind of show the information that they're taking in, whilst disregarding their surroundings.
Yeah. It becomes something like really interesting about like the significance of our reality and our bodies and like, you know, I mean, I know we've spoken about kind of, you know, bodies soon might be rendered completely useless and just a threat to our lives, and you know, suddenly we might be able to live forever and that eternity through machine and technology. And it's quite interesting to have that perception that's really kind of the digital and obviously of virtual reality as well, where like the reality is sort of rendered kind of mundane and irrelevant, isn't it? And
I think perspective, you know, as saying again, is one of the most important elements towards this. You know, there's, as I mentioned with that quote with Trevor Paglin, his work, when he discusses about how machines are influencing and understanding and recording our every interactions, is that when we start to merge with these machines, what perspectives do we then have? And you know, how can we challenge this? Because I think, you know, the work that I have at the moment again is that merging of almost becoming bionic. I mean, I don't want to go too far into the sci-fi area, but you know, it does feel like we are starting to develop and evolve and forcefully evolve into a future that we may have visions and perceptions of what's going on, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles away. And you know, it's very interesting to see where it's going to go.
Yeah, we spoke about a lot in our last two talks, actually, that kind of disconnect from the land, but that sort of very personal relationship that we have to the world around us and with each other. And I also think it's quite interesting that you're talking about like imagery that like satisfies our limited like attention span. That sort of as we grow more disconnected from our reality, we're sort of deciding that it's mundane, it's boring, so kind of why bother? The digital is way more interesting. That it's like these other worlds become something that it's actually like, you know, that you're making. It's about grasping, as you say, our attention. And I just feel like it's like that pushing into something that is so much more disconnected, that the world around us, our reality is just becoming so like so mundane. It's just rendered obsolete, isn't it?
Oh, completely. I think when talking about how um, excuse me, give me a minute to gather my thoughts.
Okay.
When talking about, could you remind me the last part of that question? I'm afraid.
It's okay. Yeah, I was just talking about how like, you know, reality is just sort of rendered obsolete by the digital, and like with the virtual worlds you're making, it's all about grasping that attention that we are beginning to sort of lose touch with,
Mm.
as we just become more and more disconnected from the world around us. Really, that's kind of what I was saying.
Yeah, yeah. I think with terms of our natural origins and our connection to kind of the natural world and our past, I feel like every time we get closer to advancing in technology, we're just taking a step further away from this. And again, within that terms of grasping the viewers, I think that in a world where technology is so consuming, you are so focused and driven towards this black screen, that it feels irrelevant or needless to even look back on what we have or what we had before. But I think that's really the challenge that a lot of people are going to find in the future, is trying to provide this awareness for an old connection that we used to have. And you know, there's a lot of people now that are so completely out of touch with nature. I feel like it's almost a shame in a way, and it's trying to find ways of kind of bringing nature back.
Mm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that is so nice about the work, it'd be cool if actually we could bring up some of the images again, just to talk about some of the specifics. But you're talking about kind of us losing our sort of natural history and our relationship to the land. But in a way, like in a lot of your images, while we sort of slip away from the earth and land, we also kind of see in your imagery a real connection to sort of land around us, where, you know, obviously we see human figures and we see things that feel very earthly. Like for me, they always feel like the sort of like weird strands, which are very wiry, also kind of imitate like roots, and like I always feel like seaweed or like reeds. So I wonder if you kind of maybe want to talk about that a bit more, and how almost like in endeavoring into the digital, we kind of mimic everything that's around us, but at the same time, we sort of push ourselves away from it.
For sure. I mean, it's almost mildly accidental in the way that nature is reflected upon the work. You know, I wanted to ensure that it was there, but through the process, I never really included too many natural elements, especially within virtual reality. There was, you know, the sculptures were heavily digital, and it was only through introducing new textures that were still digital, and molding them and manipulating them together, is when elements of the natural came through. And it does remind you that, you know, despite, you know, this digital disconnection that we get, you know, the digital was still originating from natural elements. And, you know, I think that's one of the big contributors to that aesthetic within
Yeah.
the
Yeah, I completely agree. It's almost like this sort of drive to move further into the digital, but also to like bring the world around us into it, but also, as you say, like allowing us to create our own new worlds and worlds that feel right and fit what we want and not what the world around us wants as well. And I think also one of the things that I really love about the most recent photographs you showed as well, the ones that are very textural and they feel very close to sort of this virtual realm as well. A lot of them feel, to me, from my perspective, quite cellular. It's like you kind of ripped open like some weird mechanical body, which is sort of human, sort of not human as well. And you're left with this thing like here in the image on the right. It's like kind of like some vein, or there could be like blood running through it. But then there's this very digital thing going on. I'd love to hear you talk more about that if you want to.
Yeah, of course. I think with with the process that I was doing in this, I was I always wanted to have some natural elements, and I think that's why this struck out to me a bit more. Is I was painting, and then after painting, taking photos, putting them into Photoshop, inverting them and inverting them and inverting them and inverting them, which essentially is just completely flipping the natural colors that they have. And when altering this, there was such intriguing color palettes that came through, and it became something that I wasn't necessarily aware of before. It feels like there's a synergy between the artificial and the natural. And like you're saying, with it feeling almost like an organ or a part of you or part of something, it does have whilst being digital, it maintains that natural aesthetic, and I think that's always been important within the work.
Yeah, definitely, completely agree. And I also think what's like really nice and really interesting about process as well is that a lot of it's obviously situated in the digital, but then also juxtaposed within your previous work and from what you just said about those photographs as well, where you're actually using mixed media, and painting's a very physical kind of, I mean, it's not very like heavy intensive labor, but the kind of whole experience of it is really physical and really sort of tangible. And I mean, when I paint, there's a lot of like emotions running, and I'm in a world that it's not quite within reality either. I'm sort of outside of it, but then to sort of reposition that into the digital is quite interesting. A lot of similar themes running throughout as well, isn't there?
For sure. And I think in terms of this kind of new textured shots that I have, it definitely it's almost mimicking the natural. It's a fragmented reflection, and even though you can understand that the image even now is entirely built from a digital origin point, it still retains this natural feeling, and that, it's almost like a partial abstract expressionism. It's you get a sense of emotion within the changes of contrasts, and I feel like people are now more tuned in to these kind of feelings and aesthetics now that we've been so aware of the digital and so sponged in with what we see, that we can decipher it a bit more, whereas we may not have previously.
No, I agree. And I feel like also the digital is something that I've always sort of felt and seen as something that is so to and physical self, but I think generally because of more and more like a part of my reality, and more I like that as well, that there's this sort of tangibility where it does feel quite tangible, and something that is also becoming like with it's in metamorphosis, it's still merging and forming. And I really like that about the work, and I wonder if I wonder if you could talk more about that kind of in terms of virtual reality and this sort of tangibility of the digital.
Yeah, sorry, you broke up on the original part of
Oh,
your.
sorry.
I heard the tangible and the virtual reality, but what was the original thing you said at the start?
Yeah, I was just saying how like I've always felt like the digital is really sort of intangible and it's like separate to myself. But obviously because of the pandemic and I just think the way that we're also living our lives, like we're meeting here today and that feels so tangible. It's like within reach. And yeah, I'm curious on kind of like your views on like the tangibility of the digital realm, especially in terms of VR as well.
Mm.
And yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know, in terms of my own perception of the digital, I feel as though I have been majorly disconnected with, you know, and especially going through university, going an entire year without really going to a university campus. That, you know, that sounds preposterous that you can spend an entire year doing a course or whatever you might be working on and only being in a room. I pretty haven't really left this room too much besides walks. And it does, you do start to become accustomed to interacting in a digital manner. And it does, I feel like we have become, or starting to become, used to interacting in this way. And it feels more natural almost now to talk like this rather than in person. And so I definitely think that plays a role within it all. But with virtual reality, I think it's, you know, it's the step further. Being able to interact with your surroundings and to bend and change and create, it does feel tangible. And I think, you know, maybe in a few years to come when the software, because it's still very early on for virtual reality, at least for what I know, there's still, you know, a long way that it can come and how it can be enhanced. But you know, I definitely think combining mediums is a way to increase that materiality.
Yeah.
Likewise, with the project that I was doing before, Synthetic Gaze, I was combining light projections, animations, and paintings to then create a kind of synergy with the work. So yeah.
And it's definitely sort of blurring the sort of reality sort of within our world as well, and obviously within the work too. And I must say that I absolutely love the irony of the fact that the video and connection keeps breaking up.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about this digital world in this sort of fantastical way, and it's like so strong and so kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And then it just breaks up.
Yeah, it's a strange one. I mean, we mentioned this before, but the idea that, you know, we can connect to someone instantaneously, but that it's still, you know, the software is still not perfected the way that we can break up, that it can be distorted. And how does that make you feel? The fact that it is fabricated. It's not, you know, I'm not really having a conversation with you at the moment, even though we kind of are. So it's the uncertainty with the digital that I'm kind of really intrigued about, and to see where it takes us in our own evolution and where that expands to. But
yeah, definitely.
there
And
is
I think
for sure. There is.
yeah. Yeah, and I think this would be a great time. If anybody else has any questions, any comments they'd love to make or pose to Alastair, please come on. But oh, go for it, Isaiah.
Oh, you spotted me.
I did.
I might have missed out the start, but can you just kind of like walk us through like your process, like how you created these like networks of like digital dust?
What was that? Sorry, digital dust.
Basically your sculptures.
Yeah. So originally, based on the virtual reality work that I was doing, you would create, the best way I can describe it is with the painter metaphor. I mean, you are essentially painting in 3D, and this paint you can expand, duplicate, change, and when you're changing these things, then you can then switch to photographer mode and fiddle around with different lenses within it and create even more perceptions of that already fabricated subject matter. And so already, just from the images that I get from that shoot, it's already been through a variety of processes before getting to that stage. And so then taking those images out, I then try and use softwares within, Adobe Photoshop, where you can produce software called Content Aware, which is basically, if I was to take half the image selected and use that software, it would just look at the previous image or the previous other side and then replicate what it thinks should be the rest. And so I've also been using this within my work as well. So I've been using almost the machine's assistance within making my own work, and using those images that I get from that to then manipulate further, to invert, to distort, and to most importantly maintain some familiarity within the work. I know that may not necessarily answer your question, Isaiah, but yeah, that's kind of the basic process I go through.
Oh yeah, no, because I thought I heard you saying you're like perhaps doing some like coding or some sort.
So yeah, I mean there was a part of the process at the very start where I was taking source images from coding. I wasn't necessarily utilizing that coding to make programs. It was more to record that interaction with me coding, because it's such a basic part of the digital. It's something that is running right now, but we're so accustomed to the latest version of Teams or whatever we're on that the coding isn't present anymore. You're not witnessing it. And I thought that to clearly develop the project, at least at the start, I needed to go back to the roots or the coding, so I feel like that's where the coding came in. But it definitely gave me a different perspective. I mean, the exhibition that I'm going to be doing in the future, I'm hoping to create an artificial environment like the natural, but almost like digital's origin, or where the digital world started. So I will be using, let's say I'm trying to create foliage or rocks or something like that, but a digital version. I'll be getting coding or script that I've recorded and sculpting with that material or that image. It's hard to necessarily describe without being in that virtual reality, but it just replicates the image and allows you to paint with an image. And I think that is something that I haven't explored too much yet, but I'm very excited to towards the end of the project, and we'll see how that goes. But,
yeah, sure. And just like kind of like picking up on what you say about how the digital is kind of like mimicking nature as well.
Beat me to it.
Yeah, and it's always how like, I mean, if you think about like servers, networks and all, I mean they're basically like trees, isn't it? It's like networks, lots of like wires creeping everywhere, and it always reminds me of how like humans are always like, trying to take inspiration from nature's right straight out from like, perhaps like the Renaissance. Like the reason why they paint is to kind of like absorb like the beauty around them, and like, I mean, with a lot of like user interface, user experience, kind of like pedagogy, or however you might call them, is I mean, we know about things like biomimicry and how we always look to nature to kind of like you know, build our own stuff.
Well, in response to that, I mean, anything that we ever create is always going to originate from the planet that we've came from. It's interesting that you reference kind of trees with coding and stuff, because that's one of the main things I was associating it with, was when you think of roots or the digital version of roots, you think of coding, you think of kind of the noughts, the zeros, the negatives, the positives, and how it kind of reflects itself. It reflects that natural state, even though it's so far from it in the same way. I guess it's kind of that irony again. But, you know, nature, I feel like it will always kind of prevail within the works that we do. And despite, you know, however far we come with advancing digital, it's always going to come back to where we started and where we came from.
Yeah, I think that's so true and so pertinent that you say that as well. That yeah, it makes sense that the digital would mimic the world around us, because ultimately it's the only reference we have to create anything new. And I think a lot of the digital world and computers and so on is to really just try and understand that world, understand the natural world, and understand humanity and how our brains actually work and function. And I mean, it's interesting that sort of you bring up trees, and I just love this idea that there's so many words as well that we use in the digital, that language that we use, that is like the digital as an ecosystem and like a network, and that refers back to like the mycelial network, which for anyone who does not know is in every single forest and landscape. Fungi like mushrooms and so on basically help to connect every single tree to each other, and that's how they share nutrients, that's how they kind of communicate with each other when they're unwell and so on. And this sort of visual sort of network is like, it feels like something that is quite digital, but it's so rooted in our natural world and in our natural lives. I just really find it fascinating, to be honest.
It's such a strange concept that, you know, that something so artificial to us is so natural in a way. But, you know, I feel like there's only ever going to be new ways to explore this. I feel as though even virtual reality as a whole that's only connected to one of our senses. It's only our eyes. It's only our sight. But how will that be implemented when we can do that with our other senses? You know, how far will this be taken? But yeah, so,
Malcolm, as
Jasmine, yeah. No, I was just gonna add on something that's like really interesting that you might want to look up. There's this thing called a haptic bodysuit, which if you link it to a VR system, you can actually feel everything that goes on in the digital world. So they use it mainly for gaming at the moment. So like if people shot at you, you can actually feel the bullets hit you. So I think that is truly the next step. Because I was kind of like looking and wondering about your exhibition, because as you say, when you put on the VR set, you can actually see these like sculptures that you've kind of like made, or rather not even sculptures, like a whole different world that you've made. And I thought it would be so wonderful if you can actually like touch and feel these sculptures that you have created within that digital world. And then I thought I was being a bit crazy and like thought I watched too much movies. I was like, well, I'm pretty sure there's like this like bodysuit where you can feel stuff anyways, but it's actually real, and Tesla actually has one as well. So I thought that would be quite interesting because it came out when Maddie said sculptural. And I was like, oh, sculpture. And the first thing I kind of thought of like is like a physical sculpture. And it's quite interesting that she described those images that you have as sculptural. So I thought like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it was actually a physical thing? And it was quite interesting. Like you guys always talk about, you know, like the digital being like kind of like intangible, as I talked about it in Torrent's previous work. And then I kind of like thought about it, that actually, you know, the digital is kind of getting even more tangible as we speak. I guess the only thing left is kind of like the idea of smell, because we've got vision, we've got hearing, and then now like we have got touch. And I think there's even like this like devices where you can start walking as well, which is quite crazy, to be honest.
Yeah.
So like if they actually create like a smell like kind of like device, I think that's it. I think like everyone's just gonna migrate to like this like whole different virtual world of ones and zeros. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to become too appealing, isn't it? That's the
Yeah,
problem.
yeah, it is, isn't it?
But it's interesting you mentioned kind of haptic suits and stuff, because that was some of the research I was doing towards it was looking at how, you know, how touch and how textures can be integrated into these virtual reality platforms and perceptions and so on. And there was, you'll have to correct me, I will put in the conversation later with the link towards it, but there was an exhibition done where they recorded an entire room, I think it was an old museum, and they got it down to the exact measurements of each part, where it was located, all the objects that were within that room, and then replaced and completely generated within a virtual reality version, almost an exact copy. And then an audience was taken with these VR headsets on to then go into this space, but they'd created an empty white room with the exact same measurements of everything else, you know, down to the desks that were there, the books, but it was all white. There was no details on these books because all the information was on these virtual reality headsets. And it was interesting how, when looking at it from an outsider perspective, not being in the headset, you can see how absurd it looks, because you see these people holding these books that are completely white, or like touching the ceilings and the walls and being like, wow, it's so amazing. But for us, it just looks like someone's, you know, not really quite grasping reality itself. But
yeah, that sounds so strange and so bizarre and so surreal, and yet really uncanny. And I think, I mean, I want to thank you so much, Alastair, firstly, for such a wonderful conversation and for sharing your current practice. But for any final questions or comments just before we move on to Shona, as I am rather wary of the time. But yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that we could have forever, this sort of developing and metamorphosizing world. And I would just pass over to Isaiah to ask him if anyone does have any other comments and questions. But no worries if not.
Oh, I just had one further comment. Yeah, I absolutely love your work, by the way, and I feel like so much of what you were saying just like resonates so strongly with me as well. It kind of got me thinking, like, I mean, I think it was Isaiah who said about how, you know, like sort of wires and things can almost like look like kind of roots in tree branches, but it kind of like works the other way as well. So even if you think about sort of kind of familiar sort of biological processes, like, you know, like DNA and things like that seems like quite kind of computational in itself. So it's almost sort of like that kind of real kind of extent that technology is already kind of embedded within the natural. So I suppose, like, you know, it's just so kind of integral, isn't it? And it's almost like potentially it's just like an extension of nature, I guess. But yeah, loved it.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. That's a really good comment from it. I think I didn't even consider DNA within it, to be completely honest, but it's a very accurate representation of how the digital and the natural are still interweaved. And, you know, yeah, it's exciting to see where the project will go. But thank you guys. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Alastair. And I'm sure if we have time at the end, we can always come back if anyone else has any other questions for you. But thank you so much for sharing your work, and thank you for everyone who sort of joined in as well. And yeah, so now it would be brilliant, Shona, if you would be happy to share your work as well and just run us through everything, and then we can also have a conversation about it at the end.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Right, I'll just see if I can share this. Go back to the beginning. Right. Okay, can you all see that okay and everything? Right.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll mainly be talking about my current project, Primordial Loop. And just to give a bit of a kind of background info. It's a kind of experimental video, and it's this kind of real sort of like journey through time and sort of examining evolution. And it's like the video is in this kind of constant sort of forwards motion, but at the same time, the actual subject matter that's depicted are these real kind of like primitive and sort of like primordial landscapes. So it's kind of like simultaneously kind of moving towards the future, whilst also kind of being like immersed in the past. And I suppose like through this, I'm like really kind of examining, I suppose, our relationship with technology, and perhaps suggesting, as I said, in relation to Alastair's work, that it is something that has always been like so kind of deeply intertwined with us, hence the idea of the sort of loop. So I'll actually see if I can play the video itself. Bear with me a sec. So I'll just play it through with the sound so you guys can hear it, and then I'll sort of go into a bit more detail.
Okay. Okay, I'm really hoping that all played okay and everything. You
But-
look great for me.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, I thought it was like quite good to sort of show you guys with the sound and everything, because it is like really intended to be this whole kind of like immersive kind of experience. So yeah, I've kind of like picked out a few kind of key points from the video, which I'll sort of speak a bit about. So for me, I became like really kind of interested in this sort of kind of process of like cellular division. And it did kind of like, in a way, sort of remind me of some of the things Alastair was doing as well, where like the kind of textured sort of surfaces look quite sort of cellular in a way. But I kind of really wanted to go to this sort of quite a primitive state and just sort of almost have this kind of point of origin of life beginning. And the title of the work, Primordial Loop, I probably should have said this first of all, but it's actually inspired by primordial soup, which is the kind of very sort of specific blend of conditions that actually enabled life to grow. So I thought the kind of cells was like quite a sort of important part for the video. And sort of like moving on from that, you know, it kind of sort of then kind of disperses out into these sort of weird jellyfish kind of creatures. Well, I mean, they are jellyfish, but yeah, with these, I kind of, again, wanted to sort of reference this idea of like moving through time, and particularly going back to this sort of like sort of prior state. Because I was actually researching this, and it's not something I was aware of before, but jellyfish, I think, have been on the earth as long as dinosaurs. So, you know, I think they're like one of the oldest species still alive today, which is quite extraordinary. And there's this one particular type of jellyfish called the immortal jellyfish, which I think I've mentioned to you, Maddie, actually. And that jellyfish actually has the ability to sort of rejuvenate its cells. So effectively, it can sort of reverse its kind of aging process and sort of like return back to a sort of earlier sort of stage of its life cycle. So I really thought that kind of idea really kind of encapsulated the whole sort of idea of like this loop and also this kind of technological loop as well. And yeah, sort of like moving forward, you know, the video obviously kind of then opens out into this sort of jungle. And this is digitally constructed. So I was like working with like kind of a variety of software, but mainly Unreal Engine for the jungle. And again, I just really wanted to sort of like create this sort of quite kind of prehistoric looking environment. But then the workers obviously intended to be sort of viewed at the moment where we're sort of immersed in the digital and we're sort of experiencing it through a screen. And again, like I feel like it really does do something weird to your eyes when you're like watching it for so long. But I feel like there's this kind of real sort of sense of repetition as well. And that kind of comes from the sort of mirroring of the video across these like 4 panels in this sort of like strange kind of kaleidoscopic way. But I feel like because of that, a lot of the forms actually become quite kind of circular. So, you know, like this kind of rock thing, I think it is in the middle, you know, it again sort of forms that sort of like kind of round shape and the idea of like something kind of looping back on itself. Yeah, and again, same here. And the colours are quite sort of like very much like kind of blues and purples, but they feel like more kind of enhanced than natural colours. So again, I feel like that again references the digital side of it. And I suppose a lot of what we kind of perceive in the sort of digital realm is imagery that has been enhanced. So, you know, it's sort of a lot of kind of manipulated photos, for instance, and things like that. So I thought that kind of, again, sort of like creates this sort of strange kind of relationship with the natural. And I think, I mean, I don't know how other people perceive it, but there is something kind of quite, I guess, almost like, it could either be like utopian or dystopian about these environments. And I guess that almost like reflects our kind of relationship with technology in general, because, you know, there's like so much kind of amazing potential for it. But then at the same time, there's all these like sort of dystopian sort of scenarios where, you know, it could be the end of us if we're not careful. So yeah, and just to sort of go back to what I was saying about my process, I was reading this text by a scientist called James Lovelock, And he actually has this like really kind of interesting view about it, that information could be the basis of the cosmos. So I feel like that's quite a beautiful way of putting it. And just that sort of like, again, the sense that perhaps technology isn't something new, but it's already existed both within nature and within ourselves. And sort of going on from that, I have also been sort of like looking at the idea of the technological singularity. And it's quite fascinating because the word singularity is often used in reference to the Big Bang at the start of the universe. So it's almost like we've already kind of encountered a singularity with the formation of the universe, but we're kind of heading towards another one potentially. So again, it's that sort of like sense of repetition and things kind of looping. And towards the end of the video, I really wanted to sort of, I guess, kind of, yeah, like reference that sort of singularity in the sense of like that kind of motion and sort of movement forwards, even though the video is still kind of rooted in the past. But I wanted to sort of like create this kind of acceleration. And I don't know, maybe this is like too literal sort of interpretation of it, but it does also become kind of increasingly pixelated. So it's like you're kind of almost like heading towards the static. And in a way, like it kind of got me thinking that a pixel is actually quite similar to a cell, if you think about it, in that they're both kind of fundamental building blocks to life. So again, yeah, that's kind of the main sort of aspect of what I was exploring with that. And just sort of moving on a little bit, I have also been working on some prints as well. And these are actually created with the Deep Dream algorithm. And, you know, that was just like so much fun to do. But yeah, I mean, for those who haven't heard of this, it's basically just this kind of algorithm that you can sort of feed images into, and it sort of creates these like almost like kind of machine visions of the world. So with these ones, there's actually merging jungles and cityscapes, and it kind of creates this new sort of perception of reality. And I became like very much kind of interested in this sort of algorithmic vision. And again, I feel like if you look quite closely at some of them, you do see these kind of like repetitive patterns as well. And for me, that kind of relates back to a lot of what I was doing in my video. And it's kind of like, I feel like algorithms do seem very much kind of drawn to certain sort of forms and certain shapes. And then I was also reading this book by Ray Kurzweil. I guess that's how you say his name. And he actually has quite an interesting view that evolution is a process of creating patterns of increasing order. So again, it's that whole kind of like repetition. And again, just that sort of sense of a loop. And I thought I'd include these because they're just honestly very bizarre. But these are the more sort of like traditional deep dream images that you get. So these were just sort of like processing just like one image of a jungle. And, you know, you can just sort of see all of these like really weird creatures emerging. And same here, like all these like strange dogs and stuff. And it's kind of like, I found the sort of the repetition of the eyes really interesting as well. And again, it kind of goes back to that whole sort of process of seeing and vision and sort of the way an algorithm perceives something. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at there, and we can talk further if there's any questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to come online or just post them in the Teams chat or Instagram chat, whatever works for you. But yeah, that was absolutely amazing, Shona. I feel like my eyes are still slightly kind of getting over your video, which is a great thing. I felt almost hypnotized by it, like I was watching it, and then my eyes, I mean, obviously everyone can see me as well, I was sort of getting lost in it, and I was just sort of my eyes getting wider and bigger, and it was like, it felt almost like something was expanding and you were like journeying throughout the landscape, which I really, really liked. And especially with that relationship to the Big Bang as well, really did feel like a world expanding and reflecting, and those repetitions and those patterns that are constant in nature and obviously as well in the digital. Yeah, maybe you could talk more about those things and kind of that essence of that metamorphosis within the film and kind of what was going on there. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I suppose I was like, just, well, I mean, for anyone familiar with my work, I feel like evolution is a real kind of focal point for me. And it's sort of that state of transformation that I really do sort of go back to exploring a lot of the time. But I suppose with this, it was just this sort of idea of not necessarily like evolution in this sort of most like kind of widely recognized sense, but just that kind of idea of things sort of like evolving, but in a more kind of, in a way that kind of like fluctuates between the past and the future as well.
Yeah. And I really love that kind of visual conversation as well between something that is present and something that's obviously like, we're sort of moving, as you say, towards the future while journeying towards the past. And there's this very strange thing that we kind of actually also touched upon with Alastair, that and with Torrin and throughout our talks really actually, that it's like this cyclical thing about life, this cyclical thing about nature and ourselves, that, you know, while moving forward, ultimately we kind of always reference the past, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting when you think about in order to sort of predict the future in any way at all, you do actually have to look back through history and you have to see what's come before, and sort of through doing that you can almost sort of like kind of extrapolate sort of events to sort of look towards where we're heading. So yeah, it's like, I mean, you wouldn't be able to have a future without a past. I mean, it kind of goes without saying. I guess that's an important idea for me as well.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone else have any other comments, Isaiah, on Instagram, or anyone else that would like to come online and say any comments or have any questions?
I've got a quick comment, if that's
Sure, go for it.
First off, honestly, that work is so enticing, and I know exactly what you mean, like really, with when you were saying about how you're just getting so attracted and allured into the screen. One thing I kind of noticed, that it felt almost like ethereal, and like almost spiritual in a way, while still maintaining that kind of digital and natural presence. And I found it interesting how it almost felt like an ascension or descension to something, not necessarily knowing where that would go or what it means, but I just found it intriguing how I was getting these kind of these feelings from it, you know. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I really do love that interpretation of it. And I guess that kind of like spirituality, there is almost like this sort of sense of, yeah, as you said, kind of like transcending. And I suppose sort of in reference to what I was kind of like researching about the singularity, you know, there is this kind of potential for humans to actually get to this point where we do actually manage to transcend biology in some way. And I mean, I think you did actually sort of mention this in your talk, Alastair, but sort of that idea that, you know, perhaps we could even sort of like conquer aging and sort of, I suppose, like experience reality in this new way through this kind of combined sort of nature and technological state.
It's massive, honestly, massively interesting. But you know, it's one of those things as well, when you're talking about that, it almost feels like the work becomes more than just work. It feels more like an entity, or some like more like a relationship with something. You know, I feel more connected, and I relate to it a lot more. It's really intriguing stuff. But, yeah.
Thank you so much. And another comment or / question that we've had in the chat from Seb is asking about how you would actually display the work. And unless I was still completely hypnotized about your film, I don't think we've spoken about that. So it'd be great to hear about how you would plan on displaying the work, the film and the stills as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm still kind of like working this out, so it's still a bit in progress, but I guess for the film, you know, I think I kind of want multiple screens and just really ginormous screens, potentially even sort of setting something up in a kind of planetarium type kind of experience. So I think it would be quite nice if people could sort of, I guess, almost like kind of lie back and sort of, I don't know, potentially even be like looking up at the work in a way. But yeah, I think it's quite important for it to be quite a kind of, I don't know, like, I guess meditative sort of experience.
Yeah, and I guess similar to what we also spoke about with Alastair's work, that kind of all-consuming experience as well. And it's quite interesting that the idea of the planetarium as well, I sort of noted down when I was sort of thinking about your film at the end of it, the sort of where it was like the universe kind of expanding, that kind of Big Bang kind of thing. It's like if you were sort of reclining in a planetarium, obviously that would be quite a meditative and calming experience, but also quite hypnotic from kind of what I experienced from the video. Yeah. And it's like looking up at the universe while kind of also consumed and looking at the metaverse, which I think is what people are currently referring to the digital as. So there's a really nice kind of relationship there, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely.
Does anyone else have any other comments or questions for
Shona?
Shona?
And it's interesting to think about, because like the word metaverse, I mean, it literally, I mean, of course, it comes from the word metaphysical and universe, isn't it? So it's something that is beyond physical life experiences. So I think that's quite a nice word. And I don't know, I think the sense I get from the films and the body of works is there's this sort of sense of like wonderment about digital futures and the metaphysical and things like that. But would you say that you're kind of like hopefully optimistic or pessimistically optimistic, if that even is a word?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Because I can sense some sort of like cautionary like tale.
Yeah, I suppose
within your work.
I suppose the thing is there really is that potential for it to go either way, isn't there? You know, and I feel like particularly at the moment we are at this kind of quite a crucial stage really with our relationship to technology. I suppose overall I am kind of optimistic about it, you know, as I think there is like just so much kind of limitless potential really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose like in a way, you know, I feel like a lot of the landscapes, you know, they are like almost like references to the sort of sublime. So I don't know, maybe it's like a sort of digital sublime in a way. So I suppose it really is that kind of like wonderment of nature, even though it is presented ultimately in this digital form.
Yeah, no, cool. Yeah, but because it just reminds me of like I guess the last, maybe I'm getting a bit too ahead of myself, but maybe in my mind, the last kind of like huge push against like, you know, the growth of like technology as we know now. I mean, obviously it's the romantics, isn't it? Industrialization and things like that. I mean, I guess back then like artists were like vehemently against, you know, machines and how it detracts us from the natural world. But I don't know, maybe perhaps it's like there's an upcoming like art movement as well, a movement to kind of like help us understand and like negotiate like technology better, so that we don't get like totally disconnect. And yeah, I think that was more of a statement.
I think one of the most interesting things about your stills and your photographs is that it's almost like where the kind of digital and the physical natural world and computerized landscape as well sort of meets. Like not only are we sort of seeing this sort of future, present, past thing kind of converging, it's also really like, yeah, where this natural and digital thing converge and meet as well, where we kind of see like, as you say, like this AI having also effect on the work you're making as well, which I just find it really quite amazing, to be honest. It's completely out of something I could ever fathom, but the way you're sort of using technology to create that as well. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's such a lovely way of putting it. I really love that. Yeah. I mean, I suppose it ultimately is just that kind of merging, isn't it? I mean, like, I think that is quite apparent throughout the video. But then even in the work, the kind of deep dream images, you know, I feel like just the way that the jungle is kind of almost like melting into the cityscapes in a sense, you know, it really does sort of illustrate this kind of combination of things that's, I don't know, I guess it's like that kind of like strange kind of space between something kind of physical but also intangible, which I suppose is like kind of the sort of language that we do sort of refer to the digital using, you know, like it is just such a kind of strangeness, isn't it?
Yeah, and then also something like quite human as well as digital and then natural. I mean, we spoke about with Miles yesterday about kind of the natural world taking over these human left and abandoned landscapes like quarries and so on. And then there's that kind of thing in that as well where you're merging these cityscapes and these landscapes and these natural spaces where it does kind of become like a space where the natural is taking over the human and potentially even the digital. So it's definitely that conversation of merging is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I imagine that'll be something I keep exploring. So it'll be quite cool to see where that goes.
Yeah. Malcolm, I think wanted to say.
Yeah. Just like kind of like two questions. Is that the same algorithm that Funkyverter used? I'm just curious.
Oh, I don't know. Which work of his is that actually? I'm not sure I'm familiar.
The landscapes one. I can't remember what is it called anymore.
Reimagine landscapes, is it?
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah, I do know the one. I don't think so. But I'm not 100% sure because he definitely did use like AI to create them. So I suppose it is kind of like a similar sort of idea though.
I think, but correct, because anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. I think he used a NASA program to create.
I think it's military software.
Something like that, yeah.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
So basically, if I'm not mistaken, it's a software that's developed by they are called Miltech, so by military technology companies for fighter pilots to envision landscapes before they go over to like conduct their raids and their bombings and things like that. So I guess in a certain sense, this whole idea that technology is giving us this like pre-visualization of an area based on purely topographical data, and we are actually going over there to like claim lives, which kinds of bring all of these into a conversation. But yeah.
Yeah. Just like then the last question is kind of like, could you kind of like talk through us the sound aspect of your film? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose with the sound, you know, I think it's such an important part of the kind of whole experience, really. Like, I mean, I think the video could still be interesting without it, but the sound really does kind of bring everything together, and it really does kind of create that sort of immersive kind of experience. I mean, in terms of like my sort of like specific choices for things, I guess I did want something kind of relatively subtle, but it does kind of like build up towards the end, I think, to kind of like match the sort of acceleration of the video. And it also becomes more kind of staticky and more kind of digital. And I guess there's just like so much potential for sort of working with sound because it can like kind of add so many different layers of meaning to a video or even still images. So yeah, I suppose it can completely kind of alter or kind of manipulate your perceptions of things. But yeah, I hope to kind of keep sort of expanding on that. So yeah, we'll see.
Very exciting. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments for Shona on Instagram, or would like to come online and just ask? No.
I think Cicely put something in the chat. Yeah, she said like, I feel like the film could be shown in a similar way to, how do you pronounce this? Jacob Kutstinson's Catharsis at Serpentine Galleries. If Cicely wants to expand that.
Yeah, that'd be cool if she would like to.
Yeah, it's just, it was sort of, because I was thinking about the way that there were sort of like the 4 repeated videos. He did a similar thing where it was sort of like his video was split up into several different screens. And I think, like, I'm not sure actually if it was at the Serpentine Galleries, the one that I'm thinking of, but there was a whole crowd of people standing in the middle with the screens sort of really, really large on all the walls. And so you were kind of like immersed in this sort of experience of watching the video from all directions. And I just thought yours would look really cool in a sort of a similar way. Yeah.
That actually sounds so amazing. Yeah, I mean, I know who you're talking about. I'm not really too sure on the pronunciation of the name. But yeah, I really do absolutely love his work. Yeah, and he does like kind of VR experiences as well, doesn't he? So,
yeah, there was just something about just sort of like maybe the fantastical, sort of magical, very like disorientating something about your video, which kind of just, yeah, it gave me a very similar vibe to his. And yeah, I really enjoyed the video as well.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I do love that idea of like, yeah, just having it kind of presented with multiple screens in some sort of way. So I think it would kind of match that repetition throughout the video anyway. So yeah, that could be really cool.
Awesome. Isaiah, are there any comments or questions from Instagram?
No, I don't think so.
That's cool. Then yeah, then otherwise, if there's no questions for Shona, or if anyone has any questions burning for Alastair as well, I think we'll wrap up. But I'll give you all opportunity to say something if you would like to. Yeah. Going to take that as a no. But it's been so lovely having both of you to show your work. Thank you so much. It's such an interesting conversation that you're both driving in the way they're overlapping and sort of merging as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work. It has been an absolute delight.